Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Simon. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's good to have you with us for part 2 of the Irish funds industry post-Brexit. And if you missed part 1 on the 4th of February, you can view a recording on funddomiciles.com, and please click on eSeminars. I'm Karina Vaughan, CEO of Catalina Consulting, working with leaders of technology-led companies to support business expansion, supply chain development, and ESG program management. And we've partnered with IFI Global for today's seminar, and we look forward to hearing from its CEO, Simon Osborne, and from our excellent panel. We are grateful to Andy O'Callaghan and his team at PwC Ireland for their kind support, and we're delighted that Andy will be one of today's speakers. Sincere thanks also to Jenny Santiago Young and the Invest Northern Ireland team, who are a key sponsor of this seminar. And for those of you who don't know Invest NI, it is the region's economic development agency and charged with growing the local economy by attracting businesses to the region and by helping new and existing businesses to compete internationally. It's also great to have our friends from Enterprise Ireland, Fundrex and Gather 360 in the audience again today. So if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please don't wait until the end. We will try to get to as many of them as possible during the panel discussion. So I'm now going to hand you over to our moderator, Simon Osborne, and I will join you again later. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Karina, and thank you all very much for joining us today. We are extremely pleased to have such a strong turnout, including I see a number of people who are getting up fairly early in the US, who I believe are joining us too. And also, may I say thanks to Invest Northern Ireland for sponsoring this, and also to the help we've had from Andy O'Callaghan and from PwC in putting this together. My name is Simon Osborne. I'm the CEO of IFI Global, which is a research and media firm based in the City of London. We have 3 monthly publications. One of them is The Tracker, which specializes in the impact of regulatory change and Brexit on the European asset management industry. Speaking today, we have on the panel Des Fulham, who's Global Head of Product with Khan, Tara Doyle, who's Head of Asset Management and Funds at Matheson, Andy O'Callaghan, Global Advisory Leader Asset Management with PwC, and Tom Kirkpatrick, an independent consultant who's had a number of senior positions in the funds industry. Now I'm going to give a very short introductory presentation, and then we're going to get into the panel discussion. You are all very welcome to join in. We will try and take some questions as we go along, but we'll also keep approximately 10 minutes back for a question period at the end. So please do, if you'd like to, please do send in questions as we go. We would like to try and make this as interactive as we possibly can. So I thought we'd start with a few statistics just to sort of highlight how important the UK is to the Irish fund industry. It is comfortably, the UK is comfortably the biggest market for Irish domicile funds. And in Luxembourg, just by comparison, it happens to be the 5th biggest market. Of the top 5 destinations for Irish funds, about a quarter of them go just to the UK. Many of those are UK managers sending funds back to investors in the UK. And as the bottom point here, there's been an extraordinary growth in the number of UK managers who've sought and obtained authorization in Ireland since Brexit came along. So another way of saying the same thing is that any jurisdiction in the European Union by country mile, even much more so than Luxembourg, Ireland has more invested in making sure that things go smoothly from here on out. So Ireland, can it be, and this is going to be, I think, an important point of discussion today, can it be the bridge between the EU and the UK. And I was reflecting upon the comments I was going to make today, and I happened to be reading an article in The Spectator, which is considered to be a serious and important publication, as I'm sure many of you know. And they made the point, this is the first time, actually since Napoleonic times, that we now have two competing economic systems in Europe. And by the way, The Spectator then went on to make the point that the EU's protectionism, as they see it, I'm not saying I see it, but that's as they see it, it can be compared to Napoleon's continental European blockade. By the way, that blockade was actually ended by an Irishman, or at least an Anglo-Irishman called Wellington, at a place just on the outskirts of Brussels called Waterloo. But it is an interesting point, a more serious point, is that we do now have the Brexit phony war, which went from June 2016 to December 2020. The phony war is over. We may potentially, unless a grown-up in the room like Ireland comes along, we may be into a real, true economic war where we have these two competing economic models in the same geographical region of Europe. That's never happened before, because when Ireland and the UK joined the then EEC in the 1970s, it was a very different animal. Each country basically had its own regulatory regime, particularly in financial services and in many other things too, but that is obviously not the situation today. But will the Irish be able to step in and keep things on the straight and narrow? Fortunately, we have an Irish EU Commissioner for Financial Services in Mairead McGuinness. Hopefully, she will help get the UK into an equivalence agreement with the EU. She said just last week that she hopes that there will be a framework, as she called it, for an agreement in place by the end of March. But then she added, which was slightly concerning, that she didn't necessarily think that would mean equivalence. And equivalence, as far as she was concerned, would depend upon, quote, the UK's intentions, unquote. But just in case you don't know, equivalence agreements can be withdrawn at just 30 days notice. So many in the UK don't buy that argument. If we were to diverge too far, then just terminate the agreement. We think, or some people in the UK, I should say, think that this is being used for political reasons, the threat of divergence. After all, we in the UK have given equivalence to the EU in 28 different areas in the financial markets. And it's worth pointing out that the UK is currently more aligned with the EU in financial services, and doubtless many other things too, than any other country in the world. So it is a source of particular frustration to us in the UK, and concern, frankly, that the EU is taking currently, hopefully not for very long anyway, the approach that it is taking. And also, the other point on this slide here is, will Ireland and the other EU countries be able to persuade Brussels not to, first of all, blacklist Cayman? That's come up again. Cayman was on a blacklist from the EU from February last year to October last year, then came, as I say, off in October. The European Parliament and the MEPs didn't like that. They voted very heavily in favour of putting Cayman back on a blacklist back in January. Luckily, it's not their decision. It goes to the European Council, but the European Council is under pressure to try and do more of what the Parliament wants. I don't know which way that's going to go, but I think it would not be a healthy sign for an open Europe if that was to happen. We discussed the change in portfolio management delegation rules in some detail in the first part of this series. I won't necessarily say much more about that now, but it's certainly something that is under review and discussion. There's also the possibility of changing private placement and reverse solicitation rules. Again, under discussion, we don't necessarily know whether that's going to happen. What we do know is going to happen is that there's going to be significant regulatory divergence. Just this year, the EU has got the following coming up. In under a month, the part one, which is the less controversial, less onerous part of the SFDR, comes into play. I think it's on the 10th of March. The more difficult part doesn't come in until next year. We have the EU cross-border directive in April, and then we have the IFR and the IFD scheduled for June. And as doubtless many of you know, the consultation period on the AI FMD review ended at the end of January, and I'm led to believe that in the third quarter this year, the Commission will announce potential changes to the directive at that time. On the other side of the fence here in the UK, we have something far less onerous, much narrower and later than the SFDR, which is going to be our ESG regulation called the ghastly abbreviate, an acronym TCFD. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, announced in Parliament he's going to make some PRIPS reforms. He also announced Solvency II reforms. And a lot of people over here believe that there will be divergence from AIFMD, at least for smaller managers, and very likely, but not confirmed yet, probably changes to MiFID II. Whether that happens this year, I don't know, but I think it's very likely to happen. We conducted a poll in the run-up both to the previous event in this series and this one to ask people, many of you doubtless joining us today, hopefully fill this in, so you will have hopefully seen these questions before. Do you think that the UK's departure from the EU is a net positive or a net negative for the Irish fund industry? There you see the figures, quite a significant majority believing it's a net positive. Personally, I think it's more doubtful, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. Secondly, and this is definitely a subject we'll be getting into in a few minutes too, is would the development of an all-Ireland fund industry be a net positive or a net negative for the Republic? A little bit closer, but still a majority saying it would be a net positive. So my other presentation is about to end, but these are the big questions we really want to focus on in the next 45 minutes or so. Is can Ireland be a bridge between the EU and the UK, or with perhaps Northern Ireland as a halfway point across that bridge, which will be, I think, the ideal outcome for all of us, and how can we make that happen? Or potentially, might it get caught in the crossfire? How will Brexit affect the evolution of the Irish industry going forward? I think the changes will come incrementally and over quite a long period of time, but they will come. Will the Irish and UK fund industries potentially even end up as competitors, or will they continue this wonderful relationship that goes back to the beginning of the 1990s, where they've complemented each other to both parties' massive benefit? And we all, I'm sure, hope that would be the preferred case. And finally, as I already said, we will get into the question of the all-Ireland model and whether that would be a useful benefit for not only the North, but also for the South of Ireland. Finally, after this, this is the second and the final part of this series, but the tracker publication that's relevant to this area is launching now an EU-UK fund forum for our subscribers and also for managers who want to talk it through in more of a sort of glorified a round table type environment. These are the issues that we will be discussing, because we think there'll be a lot to talk about in the coming months. And we want to give people from the Irish and indeed Luxembourg fund industry an opportunity to discuss those things through with UK managers. So that's enough for me. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully bring the panel up. Hooray, there they all are. And can I come to you with the first question, which is a deliberately tough one for you all, is whether you think the UK's departure from the EU, which we put in that poll, is actually a net positive or a net negative for the Irish fund industry. Does anyone particularly want to hand up and go first? Tom, you're top of the screen for me, so I don't know whether you want to take that one first, and then we'll just go around the block.
Well, I'm a natural optimist, so I think it has to be a net positive. It doesn't mean to say there won't be bumps on the road along the way, but Ireland has the advantage of having a very, very well-established product base and skills base. And I think a commercial and pragmatic outlook which will help. So however regulation develops from the UK, however it develops from the EU, I think Ireland is in a position to be able to adapt to that, and to be able to find solutions for clients, which again, at the end of the day, is really what everybody's here for. So I think it's that pragmatic approach, dealing with the hand that's dealt, and working out solutions to problems has been the strength of the industry in the past, and hopefully will be the strength of the industry going forward.
Okay, and Des, may I ask the same question to you?
Yes, Simon, I mean, I would strongly agree. I mean, I think it has been a net positive for the industry here in Ireland. We've seen a lot of overseas asset managers, be they UK entities or US firms who would have established their European beachhead in the UK, set up operations in Ireland. The central bank has required significant substance in those firms, which has brought senior people from large asset managers into Ireland, and those senior managers now want to make a success of the business that they have here. So I think it brings Ireland into an area where it hasn't previously specialized. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. And I think it gives a lot of opportunities to indigenous Irish firms as well that have, that have supported the industry down the years and have grown with the very significant fund servicing business that we have in Ireland. There are lots of opportunities for those businesses as well. So it has been a net positive to date, and I think it's only the start of that process. I think as those senior teams bed in, as they understand the talent that they have access to in Ireland, and as they use Ireland as their beachhead to the EU, I think there'll be lots more opportunities. Thanks.
And Tara, so you're next on my screen position here, so I'd be interested to know what your perspective is on all of this.
Sure, and I think, Simon, when we were preparing for this, I think I took on the role of the pessimist in the room, and I think it's only in the Irish funds industry could an optimist actually be characterised as a pessimist, because as you can probably tell from the 73% return, there's a very positive approach within the Irish industry to the opportunities that Brexit has presented. And I think Des and Tom have articulated them very well. We've obviously had a very strong response from day one, trying to position Ireland, trying to identify opportunities for Ireland, because we've not been blind to the challenges. I mean, you outlined them really well in the slides. Ireland has traditionally exported a lot of funds to the UK. It is our largest market. And so anything which threatens that market is a challenge. And so it is something we've been really alive to. My positioning in all of this comes from a starting point of the UK outside of the EU is a bad thing. In a financial services context, it is not good for the European financial services market to have such a significant player opt out and be on the outside rather than on the inside. And financial services is a key industry for Ireland. So something which is not good for the European industry is, by its nature, not good for the Irish industry. So that's where I think the negative comes from. But in terms of, is it a positive? I know why 73% of people said it was, and I know why Des and why Tom said it was, and I know why Andy thinks it is as well. And I agree with all of them that it is an opportunity for Ireland. There has been really positive development in terms of Ireland becoming a base for increasingly sophisticated activity, I think, and a replacement of activity or displacement of activity into Ireland. So I think all of that is positive. I just think some of those challenges will remain. And I think we have to really be on our toes and really alive to them if we are to ensure that it remains a positive for Ireland.
Thank you. And Andy, as Tara said, you've got perhaps a more optimistic position than she has on this, but go ahead.
No, I'd share all of those comments, including Tara's, absolutely, and there will be bumps in the road, but that poll finding doesn't surprise me, or probably any of us who have worked with clients and the industry over the past 4 years, really, since the referendum, in terms of their planning. The Irish Times had an article last week which struck me. It said that 24, I'm just reading this, 24 of the world's top 25 asset managers had chosen Ireland. Now, some were here already and have built out their business. I didn't know it was that high, and that's not to say many in those 25 don't also have a location elsewhere in Europe. I'm sure they do. But in preparing for this, it did make me reflect on why that was. And we've all worked with these clients in a live sense. But certainly those initial considerations post referendum around for a business that was running everything in Europe pretty much from a management perspective from the UK. Ireland was and is a good fit. So I come back to my firm belief that Ireland does complement the UK, and in fact even more so now, because being English speaking, having the common travel area, which is a huge advantage in terms of people mobility, common law jurisdiction, same time zone, all of those things, very familiar setting and location, made it an easier option. And I think what we're now seeing, and will see, Simon, this will dictate how beneficial it is longer term, is how well does Ireland complement the UK, and I would hope that it does. Most of our clients, and I'll speak from our own experience, don't want to move huge functions out of the UK. They really don't. They've chosen the UK. It's a fantastic location for their portfolio management activity and lots of other activities. But to the extent to which they put substance into Europe, and they will, Ireland has done very well so far. And I think that's probably what we've seen over the past couple of years, especially.
Right. Thank you. Now, Tom, you're the one that gave me the idea of this analogy of the bridge. So I think I should come to you next with this question, particularly as I think I'm right in saying you're in the north. I like this analogy of Ireland being a bridge between the UK and continental Europe, with perhaps Northern Ireland, which I believe is where you are, as a sort of halfway point across the bridge. And what I'm going to ask you is, in as much practical detail rather than theoretical broad brush kind of stuff, what can either Northern Ireland, what can the south of Ireland actually do to keep the show on the road, to do the kind of things that Andy was just talking about, to make sure that the complementary beneficial relationship continues? Because I don't want to appear negative or controversial, but there is some angst going on between the EU and the UK at the moment. Maybe this is a massive opportunity. Thank goodness there is an Irish Financial Services Commissioner in Brussels to step in and make sure things do not go off track. So over to you. Or, but as to quote yourself from the prep call, if it goes wrong, could Ireland, and particularly even Northern Ireland, get caught in the crossfire?
Yeah, look, I think, one of the challenges for Ireland in growing is going to be access to resources, particularly, if we're looking at changes to portfolio management delegation, looking at changes to the whole distribution arrangements, is the skill base. So hopefully, if you're an environment where you've got a business or an industry that's growing, there are going to be challenges around skills. Now, for those areas that I discussed, those skills exist in Northern Ireland, not to any great extent. But from the wider industry, I think there are a lot of potential areas for cooperation for firms based in the Republic to leverage resources in the north. And Andy's a prime example of that, of what has happened at PwC and how he's been able to leverage the skills and the professionals that are available to him in Belfast to help his wider business. And so, setting aside any regulatory requirements or regulatory changes that we've talked about before that may be helpful, whether it's location of directors, whether it's ability to perform fund administration responsibilities, those types of things, which would require some sort of regulatory input. I think we still have a fairly substantial potential ability base here, because when you look at fintech, you look at risk management, you look at operational outsourcing, you look at accounting skills, you look at consulting skills, there is a substantial body of people, I reckon probably in the region of 10,000 that fall into that type of skill base. And then when you look at the stats in the Republic of Ireland around the AFA's stats, you get 16,000 employed directly in the funds industry, and another 16,000 ancillary staff. So proportionately, it's a reasonable number. So I think it's then how individual organizations can look at how they want to leverage that, either by outsourcing arrangements, acquisition arrangements, setting up their own offices. And certainly all of the agencies have done a tremendous job over time, whether it's the IDA, Invest Northern Ireland, Enterprise Ireland, etc., in supporting business growth on the island. And certainly my own experience in terms of working with Invest Northern Ireland was very, very good indeed, and a very pragmatic and intelligent approach towards understanding a business's needs, what their objectives were, and then how we start to fill in the gaps, really down to some of the most practical aspects of that, whether it be location, staff training, financial support, etc. So I think there are a lot of those building blocks that are there. But coming back to the regulation piece, I think we don't need to wait, I think, for regulatory changes. I think if businesses are looking to expand and do it in a controlled way, then there's a talent base here that can help with that.
I mean, moving on to Des and to Tara, and then to Andy, just in response to what you've just said, Tom, that's all absolutely true. What is potentially concerning is whether or not the regulatory situation will allow for all that to happen. And I wonder, perhaps Tara, as you're the lawyer, perhaps I should come to you before I come to Des and ask you whether or not there is a concern that there could be changes to portfolio management delegation, there could be changes to distribution, and I understand there is a distinct possibility, even a probability that when the distribution directive comes in, that the EU will make the oversight of that go from the jurisdiction where the fund is domiciled. At the moment, people fly off from London to Germany, to France, or Italy, wherever it is they go, with their fund domiciled in Ireland. That may not be strictly legal in a few months' time. So is there a danger if the deterioration in the relationship, which we've seen a little bit of in the last month or two, in the EU and the UK, could affect Ireland in that way?
Sure, and what we're talking about here is the AFMD review. So
that's part of it, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, the Alternative Investment Fund Manager Directive is up for review. It was due to be reviewed a short while ago with COVID, and we're 28 minutes into my first webinar of the COVID era before we mentioned COVID, but that resulted in some delay in AFMD review. It is now moving ahead, and some concerns have been raised as a result really of issues that that ESMA wrote to the Commission about around things around delegation and around letterbox entity status and around activity outside of the EU and how much of that should be permitted relative to activity within the EU. And concerns that really was something which would jeopardise the position of the Irish funds industry as an industry which has been based on traditionally the outsourcing of investment management activity to other jurisdictions. And obviously post-Brexit, with the increased substance requirements for Irish management companies, there has been a shift in terms of the amount of substance required within Ireland and within the EU relative to outside the EU, but just a concern that the AFMD review would say that's not enough and we must go further, we must have more substance within the EU. I think there's quite a strong view within the Irish industry that what we have done and the enhancements the central bank has introduced, packaged in this thing that we refer to as CP86, that has meant that we now have a very substantial industry in Ireland that will withstand the AFMD2 scrutiny, and that the approach that we have adopted in Ireland should survive that, and that it shouldn't be a case that we're not able to delegate portfolio management outside of Ireland, because we're looking at this now, and obviously in the context of this webinar, we're looking at it through a Brexit prism. But the important thing I think to bear in mind is that we've always had a world outside the EU. We just happen to have the UK in it now as well. But we were only 28 countries. We are now only 27. There are over 100 countries in the world. We've always been a global industry. So the US has always been very active in the European industry, and the US has always been outside the EU. So I think we can get a little bit distracted by Brexit into thinking that having a fortress EU and only having EU investors have access to EU investment management activity is a way forward for the EU. It's not. And I think there is a very strong sense within the European community that the funds industry is a global industry. It should have access to global markets, global expertise, and the ability to sell funds globally. And that's something that we're very keen to protect in Ireland. So I would feel that we have a very aligned approach to this. The Irish Central Bank, the Irish Department of Finance, the Irish industry are all aligned behind the idea of preserving the ability to actually be able to engage globally and to be able to have access to global investment managers, which now includes the UK. So this is not something, and certainly something we need to keep a very close eye on, but in the longer term or even in the short to medium term, I don't believe that the outcome of AFMD2 will be to prevent delegation to UK investment managers.
Well, I sincerely hope you're right. I'm going to come to the first question that I'm going to pick up from the audience, and Des, I'm going to put this to you and then to Andy, if I may, because particularly if you, as your head of global, head of product with Calm, this question I think is quite a good one from somebody who's asked, to what degree does Ireland have the ability to influence how much it complements the UK asset management industry if decisions around operations outsourcing and portfolio delegation are European level decisions?
So, I mean, Ireland has always punched it well above its weight in terms of its influence in Brussels. And if you want one example of that, you need look no further than the I suppose the position of the border in Ireland in the Brexit discussions. That was one of the top 3 areas that the EU had to have agreement on before moving on to the free trade agreement discussions. So Ireland has been influential in Brussels. Simon, you've mentioned that the EU Commissioner for Financial Services is Mairead McGuinness, obviously an Irish commissioner, and actually from near the borders as well. If you look at the Irish funds industry itself, the industry's recently recruited and has permanent representation on the ground now in Brussels with a view to influencing the direction of events there and lobbying. The Irish industry itself has always been very active through AFAMA, and we recognise that with the UK having left the EU, that we need to be a very strong voice for an industry that has allowed us to develop a very significant industry in Ireland that employs in excess of 15,000 people. So it's incumbent on us to lobby to ensure things like delegation are retained. And I think where the interests of the Irish industry and our partners in the UK coincide, we'll certainly be making those arguments. And certainly we can see from firms that have established operations in Ireland, they're very active in the Irish Funds Industry Association now as well. They're making their voices heard. And I think Ireland can certainly play a very strong role at an industry level in ensuring that we have the right framework in Europe for financial services to have a competitive environment which enables us to deliver great products to clients at a reasonable cost. I mean, I think as an industry, what we don't want is a scenario where we're having to have multiple products just for regulatory purposes, which just serve to drive up costs to our end investors.
Thank you. And Andy, can I come to you? In our prep call, you made the point, which was well taken, that the EU is not one sort of block, in that there are some countries that are more open than some others, and you cited the Dutch and Luxembourg as being very much in the open category, along obviously with Ireland. But my question to you is coming back to the question I put to Des in a way, and you have a global brief at PwC, is in all honesty, do you think that, let's call you the good guys, whether you have the influence if things, there is also some other people will have a different point of view of the direction of the EU, direction of travel over the next few years in terms of regulation of financial services and various other things doubtless too. Do you think you, the good guys, can hold the fort and make sure that it remains an outward-looking EU in working in close collaboration with the UK, or is there a danger that it could go the other way?
So the final end state is not fixed, and it never is within Europe. And I think we in Ireland, being a small country within Europe, have known that from early on, that it's fluid, and ultimately it by definition it seeks to represent the views of now 27 different countries, and there are difference of views within that community, if you like. But and I am an optimist. I think I've said that before. But when I speak to my European colleagues in every European country, and some are not that really interested in this conversation about financial services, particularly because what we're talking about here is the export focused element of the industry, which is hugely important to Ireland, but equally to Luxembourg, Netherlands, and to Germany. And I think sometimes Germany is unfairly painted as supportive of Fortress Europe. Germany is a fantastic export-led economy, and doesn't always raise its voice maybe as much as it could do, and I think we will need Germany to raise it more. But Germany and Europe, all of us, need to be very focused on being competitive, on innovation, on digital transformation, on creating jobs. And we have the entire globe, and UCITS, despite the criticism, UCITS has been a tremendous export, European financial services export. So, but it's a great question, and Ireland will need to be active. Ireland is active. I think Des is absolutely right. But so are other countries. It's not just an Irish view. That there are other countries who are in that debate, in that discussion, and that will continue. And the industry needs to be active in the conversation as well. So, and there will be bumps along the road. There will be pieces of legislation that do appear to be very, inward-looking, challenging. But I ultimately politics and business interact here, and I think it's important for the industry to articulate that message about being forward-looking, positive, and ultimately supportive of the end investor. Because to be competitive for the investor, the industry needs to ensure that the framework it's operating in is supportive of innovation and progress.
Thank you. I'm going to take the next two questions together because I'm conscious already we've only got 20 minutes left or so in total, and I want to leave some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to put the next two questions combined, which is, first of all, whether or not you've already, to a certain extent, all answered part of the first of these two questions, whether or not the Irish and UK fund industries could continue to complement each other, or might they become competitors. That was going to be all about whether or not, if things go wrong, or even if they don't go wrong, whether or not there's going to, with the UK putting in these free ports, whether, because there has been talk in the UK even long before Brexit, when George Osborne was Chancellor of the Exchequer, he was looking at setting up an international financial services centre in the UK way back in beginning of the last decade. So that was never formally terminated. It's on the shelf in the Treasury somewhere. I had some discussions a long time ago on that, and I even sat, it wasn't a formal event, but in a parliamentary committee room discussing that shortly after Brexit happened. So it's floating around there, and there's a free port thing, and there's potentially a free port coming to Northern Ireland and doubtless other parts of the UK too, where they could potentially do that, which is possibly concerning from an Irish point of view. That's part one of the question. The part two of the question is, should there be, and it was the second part of our poll question, should there be an all-Ireland model for the island of Ireland's future development? Perhaps, again, because you're in the north, Tom, perhaps we should come to you first on that, and any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, I think the free port idea is probably more in terms of modern industries and the import of physical goods and the transformation of those into end product. I think in terms of financial services, the front end client facing stuff, I think will still be incredibly powerful in the UK. in terms of the product development, in terms of meeting the needs of end investors. I think what's already happened in support services in the UK is much more around use of technology, and we're seeing a lot of institutional outsourcing now, and those jobs are going offshore to India and other remote service centers anyway. So I'm not quite sure what an international financial services center in the UK would look like and what it would serve when a lot of that has already been built and is being implemented elsewhere. I think in terms of an all-Ireland model, I mean, when I spoke earlier, I talked kind of about the regulatory world and what opportunities are available there in terms of permissions to Northern Ireland. And I think my point was that there are a lot of unregulated activities that can still be supported from Northern Ireland anyway, irrespective of that. So it's really about if we're growing a bigger pie in Ireland, how do we service that pie in the most efficient way? And the resources are available to do that, irrespective of what regulatory changes are made. Now, if there are regulatory changes, obviously, as Andy said, we start falling into some of the political environment and where Northern Ireland sits. But I think from a business standpoint, it just makes sense to leverage the population that we have, to support a growing industry.
Thank you. I'm going to come to ask Des and Tara and Andy to answer that same question, but I'm going to throw in with that question I put to Tom, very good question from a member of the audience who says it would be useful to discuss barriers to an all-Ireland model and which can be addressed bilaterally between Ireland and the UK and which ones are within the remit of the EU. I suspect many can be addressed bilaterally. And I think that's a very good point and something we haven't really considered before. Why doesn't the UK and the government of the UK and the government of Ireland, London and Dublin and Belfast sit down together and do something together? I mean, forget Brussels, let's keep them out of it. Des, you want to take that?
Sure. Well, I think it'll obviously depend on depend exactly on which area you're looking at. So obviously, a lot of what we're speaking about here is kind of financial services regulation, which originates in EU directives in Brussels. So where we're looking at that, it's very challenging to do anything on a bilateral basis. I think where Ireland and the UK and Northern Ireland in particular can operate very well together, and Andy touched on this earlier, is we still have a common labour market in these islands. So there's a common travel area in place. People can move across borders without needing any visas. There's no requirement to keep track of time of people coming and going between Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, or Britain and the Republic of Ireland. So I think there are huge opportunities to work together. I mean, Ireland is a small island. You can be in Belfast in 90 minutes from Dublin. So, you could have people commuting up and down on a daily basis, and vice versa. I think, one of the things that often comes up in terms of the future of the Irish industry is, will there be enough resources and do we have a big enough pool of talent? And Ireland and Northern Ireland, I think, have often sent some of their best and brightest people to the UK, and you can see this in particular. I think in Northern Ireland, the trend has been for a lot of people to go to university in the UK, and then they might take a job in London or maybe even come to Dublin. And it would be fantastic to see, given the unique position that Northern Ireland has, that people could be attracted back to Northern Ireland, and that those people could also, support a wider all-Ireland industry. You do have, some great Indigenous businesses in Northern Ireland. First Derivatives, so PwC have a big operation. A lot of the law firms in the UK have actually done a lot of work around ISDA documentation and so on, is all done out of Belfast. So there are definitely opportunities to work on that all Ireland basis, to the benefits of both Ireland and to our partners in the UK funds industry, I would say.
And Tara, can I come to you? quick thoughts on whether you from your perspective, you had a crystal ball. Do you think Ireland and UK will complement each other? Also, the All Ireland model, and also, do you think more could be done between London, Dublin, and Belfast without Brussels getting involved? So a lot in that question. Sorry.
In fact, there may be 3 questions in there, Simon. But
just a mere 3, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
on whether they can complement or whether they compete. They're not mutually exclusive concepts. You know, we can be complementary.
Yeah, it's not either or. Yeah.
Yeah, we're used to competing with the UK as a jurisdiction. We compete in the areas of inward investment on pharmaceuticals and technological investment in Ireland and the UK all the time. So there's healthy competition between the 2 jurisdictions. Now we're potentially competing, but really when you think about it, we'd be competing for the outside the EU market, because absent an equivalence decision, the UK needs a way into Europe, and Ireland is one of those primary ways into Europe. So it doesn't make sense to compete in that sense. But, you know, the UK's ability to be able to take investment funds, market them globally, to be able to take investment services and market them globally, they are potentially a competitor, but I think a more complementary force than a competitive force, to be honest, and not one that I'm overly concerned about, because simply the size of the market, competition is healthy. When it comes to the issue of an all-island approach, I would agree entirely with what Des is saying, which is we need to think about this in terms of a labour market, because labour and the rights of citizens to be able to, you know, the rights of Northern Irish citizens to have EU citizenship is something that was preserved as part of Brexit. So their ability to be able to then work, you know, in the Republic is essentially guaranteed as well. It's a slightly more nuanced question as to whether they can, for instance, act, and I know it's one of the questions that we've received in the chat, can they act as designated persons for an Irish management company? There's a little bit of uncertainty around that. Arguably, it's within the central bank's gift to say that yes, they can. There's potentially some EU political considerations they need to take into account there as well. And then that whole issue of UK, Ireland, Northern Irish executive cooperation, that is certainly something that I think we can start moving forwards to achieve now. I mean, the focus has been entirely on Brexit and on the Brexit agreement up to this point, but the future working relationship and enhanced cooperation and a, you know, dual island approach is certain, as well as an all island approach, is certainly something that we can look to do. But we will have to bear in mind when it comes to European financial services regulation, we always have to be mindful within the Irish Republic as to the EU rules that are binding us.
Thank you. And I see the questions are pouring in. I'm going to hand back to Karina in a second so we have a formal Q&A bit. But before I do, Andy, you and I have discussed on several occasions now, and we're both huge fans of the idea of an all-Ireland model. In brief, in very practical, specific, concrete terms, what more can be done to get this thing going?
So, and I think the All-Ireland model plus the Ireland-UK conversation are very interlinked. And I have to say, I said something lighthearted. The last time I travelled pre-COVID was when I attended dinner with the British Irish Chamber of Commerce in the House of Commons. And at that dinner, every one of the major parties in Northern Ireland, plus parties in other parties in Westminster, stood up and spoke about a desire to see this very type of concept crystallise. And based upon a very strong Ireland-UK relationship where we both want Northern Ireland to succeed. That's it. There's no other agenda. We both want the people of Northern Ireland to prosper. And when we take it back to this industry, Simon, when we take a step back, the Republic of Ireland's population is about 5 million, Northern Ireland too. The clients I work with frequently ask me, is there sufficient capacity and talent in the Republic as they plan to grow and move business here, and particularly looking outside Dublin. So, you know, the regional conversation in Ireland is very important, and that's working well. But the short answer is yes, an all-Ireland model is the way to go. Now, I think that's a political conversation rather than regulatory conversation, actually, because the trade and cooperation agreement between the UK and the EU doesn't cover services. So I think it's an ongoing conversation with the politicians, and I know our own Foreign Minister Simon Coveney would be very supportive of this kind of model for an industry where employers in the Republic would like to access talent and employ people in the north, and they would stay in the north. And I do think that is worth considering. And from my perspective, I think there is support on both sides to see that happen. But it's a political conversation as much as a regulatory conversation.
Thanks. Karina, do you want to pick up this? Several questions I can see on the Q&A, and we've got some more there, so I'll hand over to you.
Okay, perfect. So a couple of interesting questions coming in on Manco. So I'm just going to try and loop those together. So given the number of new Mancos established in Ireland, is this growth sustainable? And also given that the Manco was a Luxembourg and Irish creation, could we produce an all-Ireland strategy for the Manco? Andy, would you like to have a go at that?
I was hoping you'd pick Tara.
I'm happy to have a go at that.
Go for it, Des.
At least the second part of it. I think Ireland and Luxembourg have both been huge beneficiaries of the management company regime, but unfortunately, that was an EU directive that the UCITS management company directives in the mid 2000s that brought in that requirement, and I think it was, both Ireland and Luxembourg in terms of how they implemented that in a pragmatic way that allowed people to establish products and not necessarily have a huge substance overhead in either Ireland or Luxembourg, allowed them really to cement the leading positions on the domicile side of things. I think, in terms of, will Ireland become capacity constrained around the management company side? I see there's also a point made in the chat around, the fact that the industry operates on a regional basis in Ireland. So, there are a number of the management companies I know have operations outside of Dublin. We have one in Kilkenny. I know AMX obviously have a big operation down in Cork. Some of the other management companies have operations in Limerick and Cashel. And even some of the international firms I know, one very large US institution is doing direct lending from their management company in Letterkenny in County Donegal, which is Ireland's most northerly county. So, that regional development of the Irish industry has really added a lot of capacity that allows us, to have sufficient scope for the level of business we have on the management company side at the moment.
Okay. Perfect. So another interesting question. So I put it to the panel that Ireland has proven that an all-republic solution already thrives. So 25% of Irish funds are regionally based, and a new report will show that percentage will increase once concluded, especially in the post-COVID world. So extending an all-republic to an all-Ireland model is a plug and play to a landscape that already stitches various locations together to serve clients. Andy, you're nodding at this one. I have to go to you.
Oh, it's a great point. No, fully agree. And I think the long-term solution is you can be anywhere on the island of Ireland. And we see it ourselves within PwC. Tom's mentioned our Belfast practice. It's a fantastic business. We get wonderful graduates and school leavers, fantastic people. And equally, our offices in Limerick and Galway, Cork, which are thriving on the back of this industry. So they're supporting the fund administration and management companies that are setting up in those locations. And I think, yes, extending that beyond 26 counties to 32 is ultimately of benefit to everybody.
Tom, did you want to add to that, Tom?
Yeah, look, I think the summation of the point was very succinct. I mean, I think it is a plug and play. And I think, there's so many connections, whether it's culturally, just the way we think, the way we look at things, that it's the most natural step. And I think you've got, two well-educated workforces, and you've got a degree of pragmatism whereby, you can work towards, solutions to problems and servicing our clients. I think it's clear to me.
Okay, so another interesting question just coming in about the UK's new free ports. So we obviously heard the announcement about the creation of free ports within the UK and the devolved regions. There will be at least one in each of the devolved regions. So an announcement this week, the UK government has announced it plans to spend £10 million to create green finance hubs in Leeds and London. So does the panel think that this is the start of the creation of these free ports, and what might the impact of those be on Ireland? Tara,
Tom should definitely take. Yeah.
Nobody's rushing forward to answer that one. Tom, do you want to have a go, or Tara, would you like to have a go?
Well, look, I think there's the development of the product, and then there's the delivery of the product. So, I think what the UK has consistently done over many years is innovation in financial products, and they set out their stall as being a leader in energy efficient finance, if you like. So I think that was well signposted, and they want to set up these centres clearly with a pointer towards the north as well, with the connection to London as the main financial capital. So I think in terms of developing how the overall product may work, I think that's one step. It's then how you deliver that product, because if you're delivering it to EU investors, it's going to be likely through Ireland. So I think that's an area where I think there can be a good degree of complementarity.
And I think just to pick up on the issues around ESG raised by this proposal, Simon outlined really well in the opening presentation that there is a real challenge being presented by the potential divergence between the European SFDR track and what the UK is going to do here. So at level 1, there's convergence, but once we get into level 2, there's a potential for divergence in an area that's already, huge industry engagement and investment behind, but real challenges around implementation. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how it develops in the UK, but this is going to be one of those areas where countries going off and jurisdictions going off in separate paths is not ultimately going to be in the interests of the industry overall. And a more convergent approach when it comes to matters of ESG actually is to benefit the industry as a whole, because for global asset managers, and that's who we're ultimately talking to, divergent regulations are really, really painful to comply with. Asset managers don't mind complying with regulations. They recognize the benefits regulation brings to their product. But when they have to comply with competing regulations and divergent regulations, that's when it becomes really expensive, and that's when it starts to hurt their business.
Okay. Anyone like to add anything on that, on ESG?
I think it comes back to an area where complementing and collaboration between UK and EU is absolutely vital. And again, there was a nod to it, I think, in the trade and cooperation agreement around, there are many areas where a fruitful, positive UK-EU relationship can benefit everybody. And this is definitely one of those areas. In terms of whether it's, we're speaking to some of the universities because of the common travel area where UK scientists and researchers could access research projects in Irish universities, and it's a great example of bringing people together in a solid framework. So I would hope it's an area where there's collaboration rather than just competition.
Thank you, Andy. Simon, I think we're almost out of time.
Okay.
So if I could just say final thank yous to Invest Northern Ireland and to Andy and his team at PwC Ireland for their kind support. I'll be collaborating again with IFI Global on the development of the EU-UK Fund Forum for UK managers and tracker subscribers, and we'll be sharing more information about that shortly. If you'd like to get involved in the meantime, please do get in touch. So thank you all for your time today. Hope that you enjoyed the seminar. Thank you to our wonderful panel. And I suggest that we all go and have some lunch.
Thank you. And I'll just say thank you as well. Also, on the EU-UK Fund Forum, I should have mentioned our research department is going to go out and find out what is concerning UK managers themselves, get their point of view on what is concerning them, whether it be portfolio portfolio management delegation or distribution or whatever it is, or changing regulatory environment, and then address the issues that they want to have covered. So that's what we plan to do. So as Karina says, let's go. To those of you in the US, you can go and have hopefully a good breakfast and have a good lunch, everybody. And thank you all very much indeed. And see you the next time.
Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
I guess.
And thanks, Karina.